looking at Egypt, I think that we've been taught a lot of lies about Egypt. And so people are ready to, they're looking for the truth. So I think a reason some of these woke ideologies come into being that will preach like that all the hieroglyphics and the whole Egyptian story is all nonsense. Yeah, to me, that seems like baby being thrown out with the bathwater instead of maybe keeping an open mind going, well, maybe they're different epochs of what we call Egypt. Maybe the land of Kem is a whole different epoch. Maybe that's why some of the pyramids are very different to some of the other pyramids. Then they speak about how some pyramids were made in the fourth and the fifth dynasty, and pyramids were built in different dynasties. Well, that makes sense. But I think this whole story of dynasties, they've fabricated some kind of nonsense. And I think this is why people are ready to just say, well, it's all nonsense. Instead of going, well, it's a carefully constructed pile of nonsense, which they've used fairly accurate information to build a story of nonsense with. And they say that the best lies contain the truth. So this is why I look at this, what looks like woke propaganda, where they're telling us now that all of the Egyptian hieroglyphs never existed because, we've got lots of ancient rock art here in Southern Africa. And you can see how hieroglyphics would have developed. They would have been the Sand people, the Khoi Sand people, whatever you want to call them, or the Aboriginals, or, many of the ancient peoples, people from the steppes. And they would have been drawing on a rock. And they would have drawn the gazelle and the hunting, sort of like a signpost, a way of saying there's good hunting this way. Or draw a gazelle next to the water, as if to say, well, if you keep following this direction, you're going to find water. And there may be some kind of code in the way that these drawings are presented, so we can get a sense of direction, So I think I think we can clearly see how these hieroglyphic languages have come to be, and there are other hieroglyphic forms of languages as well on the earth. We look at Japanese as an example. That's still got a big part of hieroglyphics in the language. Chinese as well. And so we can see how the language seems to have evolved. And there seems to be a basis that hieroglyphics seem to be in some of the very old languages. And we can see some very interesting hieroglyphics up in the Indus Valley as well. They found some very interesting seals, a different kind of hieroglyphics to what we know in ancient Egypt. So this makes me think that there's different epochs here. And they've mashed all the epochs into one. And possibly, like you say, Indy, they've mistranslated and miscommunicated some of the ideas because they're trying to fit everything into one time zone instead of saying, well, yeah, maybe the pyramids were built. When I look at the Giza pyramid and I look at the Sphinx and I look at the geology and the geometry of it as it relates to the astrotheological circus turning above us, it seems like it was obviously created during the age of Leo, right? And this makes a lot of sense. If it was created during the age of Leo, we're talking what, 12, 13,000, 14,000 years ago? That's a bit before 10 BC. And they did find a pyramid off the coast of Japan that was covered in coral. And according to their dating systems, which we've got to question, they reckon that that age of the coral was about 9,500 years old, which meant that that pyramid must have sank sometime in the 10,000 years period. So we could be looking at older epochs. And an interesting point, something you said quite close to the beginning, Indy.
Mhm.
In the Sumerian chronicles, the Sumerian tablets, which we know are fairly old, they speak about how in Enki's tablets, Enki's story that he's left for us, they speak about how there was a great flood and everybody had to go to the north, had to go up to, what looks like the mountains, Indus Valley, and the steppes. And they had to wait for the mud to subside. And then they went back to the original sites of the original ancient cities and tried to excavate those cities. And those that couldn't be excavated, what do they say they did? They said they built on top of it. So doesn't it make sense that in ancient Egypt there would be a city below that city? Doesn't it make sense when we go to Turkey, some of the interesting sites that we know there's a conspiracy because they won't allow us access to the sites? 10 years embargo of actually digging in there, and they're planting all the olive trees, right? So this is a real thing that's happening, and they don't want us to know the scale and age of our civilization, and that there have been successive mud floods. And speaking about the mud floods, I've been posting a couple of interesting things on my group. Here in South Africa, people are uncovering more and more evidence. They uncovered a contract with Absa Bank, Standard Bank, where they are clearly writing there, this is the 1800s, slightly late 1800s, and they are taking over the building. And part of the contract for them taking over the building is that they will excavate the building. Very interesting. They give details about the repair work they need to do and this and that. And that's here in Cape Town. And when you look at a lot of these other buildings that they say were built, right? They say that some buildings like the, is it the FNB Bank in Joburg? They said it was built in 2 years. But there were like issues with getting materials during those 2 years. So they didn't even spend the whole 2 years building. This building is impressive. They couldn't have built that building in 2 years. And we find this repetitively. So we know they've lied to us about where all of these ancient buildings come from. And the same with all of these mounds, right? Like South Africa's full of pyramids. China's full of pyramids. Eastern Europe's full of pyramids. Africa's full of pyramids. South America, North America, full of pyramids. Russia, finding pyramids. These pyramids seem to span the whole world. And then there are people that say, well, Egypt was in America. And I say, well, yes and no. Egypt was in America. But not Egypt that we know, not the Egypt we've been told about. An ancient land of Chem must have been a global civilization.
Yes.
That was, yes, in America, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Asia, everywhere. It was a global, and the Vedas speak about this Bharat, global empire.
There's a definite Commission pyramid in Australia, too. It's either Australia or New Zealand, one of the two. It's got,
yeah, brother, they're everywhere.
And it's got history of the pharaoh that left Egypt to come to Australia, and his name is on a cartouche on a pyramid in Australia, which is amazing. And there's a whole like navigational route where he traveled, where there's signs of traveling ancient Egyptians. And so if they had went that far, they could basically go anywhere.
You guys are talking about the eye, the all-seeing eye. And I think if we're talking about Egypt, we're going to have to talk about the all-seeing eye, aren't we?
Yes.
I know a few of you talking about it. Yeah, it was a question that he was saying. And I think Bernadine and Howard, you guys were all talking about this. So here's an interesting perspective. Here I've got an image that I've put here, which shows the three fundamental shamanic worlds, the 7 Hermetic principles. Now the 7 Hermetic principles produce the Ennead, right? Because the will and the memory is bipolar. It has a dualistic face, a face in both 2 spheres. Will exists both in the etheric body and in the astral body. Memory exists both in the astral body and in the causal body. So we're talking here, Pingala, the bottom sphere, or Ida, the middle sphere, or the Shashumna, which is the combination of these two, because these two are splitting off. Really, the 2 bottom bodies are really a division of the top body. There's a polarization that happens. So there is only really the causal body. Now, the Egyptians spoke about the body of Ka, the bottom one, the vital essences, the vital body, the body that could move around and affect things, etheric body. Then they spoke about the astral body, which is the astral body which is involved in the crossing over, by the way, quite interesting, like living and dying issue, because the etheric body falls off first, and then the astral body takes one into the state of the causal. And so they called the astral body the Ba, which relates to the Ida of Vedic cosmology, in the same way that the Ka relates to Pingala of Vedic cosmology. And then we've got the causal, the Shashumna, which is that spiritual body, being reflected in, these are reflected in the physical body. From the shamanic perspective, we've got the three worlds of the shaman, the divine plane, the middle world, and the underworld. So, as you can see here, the seat of the soul is the causal body. And the causal body is a hyperdimensional body, which is hyperdimensionally greater. So the physical body is like a small little body, and the hyperdimensional shift up becomes the etheric body, the bottom sphere. Then a hyperdimensional shift upwards becomes the astral body. Then a hyperdimensional shift upwards becomes the causal body. This is what all those New Age people are talking about when they try and speak about 5D, 6D, and 7D, right? Because 4D, we're living in 4D. We're already living in 4D. Time is not, you can't speak about dimension without speaking about time, because time is a flow through dimensions. So it's in the same way that 3 dimensions become a different thing to 2 dimensions, 4 dimensions becomes a different thing to 3 dimensions. The same thing that 2 dimensions becomes a different thing to 1 dimension, right? So we're existing within these 3 dimensions, but we're moving through them at a tangent. And that tangent that we're moving through the 3 dimensions with, you could consider as time. But then we've got the etheric body, which is a dimension which operates in a different flow of time, right? So this time is broken down into these 3 elements in the same way that these 3 bodies exist within our consciousness. So the Egyptians spoke about Ka. So there's a time dilation in the etheric body. Those of you that have experience projecting etherically will have noticed this time dilation. But the time dilation between the etheric body and the astral body is like exponentially greater. And the time dilation between the astral body and the causal body is exponentially greater. In fact, the causal body, if you ever have glimpses of that state of consciousness, it's so timeless. And it occupies all time. So when we are having like powerful visions of the future that we're experiencing as if they're now reliving past lives, for example, that's the causal body. So the Egyptians spoke of the Ark, the Ka, the Ba, and the Ark. The Ark is the causal body, is the spiritual body. That is the part that transcends dying. In other words, the part that reincarnates, the part that goes off, comes back. It creates a new astral body, and the astral body creates within it a etheric body, and the etheric body creates within it a physical body. Russian dolls. But the big one on the outside, that's the causal body, that's the Ark. Now in Sanskrit, Ark means eye. And so the eye, the all-seeing eye, represents that state of consciousness where one is beyond time and able to see all time. So it's omnipresence, right? It's being in all times now, able to, in the present, experience the future and the past as if it's all now, because time is the great illusion. So this all-seeing eye is really quite central to all of the occult traditions and practices, and represents the third eye. Obviously is the whole brain action. So intuition is at the heart of the spiritual body. Memory is like its foundation, and inspiration is what it taps from, in the same way that imagination is the heart of the astral body. Memory is what it taps from, and will is its foundation. Then will is what it taps from in the etheric body, and instincts is at the heart of the etheric body, and sensations of physicality is its foundation. So we've got these 3 principles running through and through. This is the Ennead, and these 7 Hermetic principles. Obviously, inspiration is mentalism. Intuition is all things are connected to other things, right? This correspondence. So intuition can sense the correspondence between things. Yeah? And the mentalism is inspiration. The entire mental dynamic is one inspired experience. Memory is vibration. Mem means water. Water means vibration. So when you're meditating on the element of water, you're meditating on vibration. This is in Taoism. This is in Vedic cosmology. This is in every system, that resonance, that powerful resonance, relates to the water element. And so, like, yeah, the upper sphere, that body that doesn't ever die, I think that is what we're talking about when we talk about the all-seeing eye. Because within that, a hyper small thing, it creates an astral body. And then within that, it creates a hyper small etheric body. And within that, creates a hyper small physical body. But right out here, encompassing that and all so much more, is the spiritual body, which holds within it the other bodies, sort of like Russian doll style. So, that's just an interesting point I thought I'd share here, an idea. These are just ideas that I've sort of worked on over the years. But now what I really wanted to tap onto was something that you were saying a minute ago, Indy. Let me just remove this from here and pop this on here. Okay, so they evidence of cosmic airbursts with energy approximately 5,000 times that of Hiroshima. Right? Yeah. This is Tal El Hammam. So they've got evidence, right? They are suggesting it's 3,600 years ago, right? And but this isn't this. Just so you know, what site we're on. We're on the Alaska Fairbanks, University of Alaska Fairbanks. So no, we're not in some conspiracy website. we're looking at legit discussions of the academia. And not that I have too much faith in legitimacy, but they got to be careful just how far they take the lie, because they will lose legitimacy, and especially universities have to be careful. So governments tend to be a lot more playful, but these days the wokeness is a disease we're all suffering from, and I think it was there before. Like, I noticed it when I was a child in school. But so here we're talking about nuclear detonations thousands of years ago. The date that we're talking about could be wrong. I mean, we're guessing that the dates are 3,000-4,000 years ago.
4,000?
Maybe they're longer. This is mentioned in the Sumerian Chronicles, that there were these great weapons of mass destruction that were brought to this planet, that there was a great war, that the great war caused these poison clouds to travel across the planet, that most people passed away because of hunger. The story of the giants you were talking about. Yeah. Mm. So there's a lot of actual evidence to back up what's in the Sumerian Chronicles, which is interesting. Like, when you start really looking.
That because the city of Krishna was said to have been destroyed by a giant, what is considered to now be an atomic bomb in ancient times. And it was always mythical, but they recently found Krishna city off the coast of Dwarka in India, right on the ocean. So it's right there off the coast, and they found that that's very much so an ancient city. It's a beautiful city. Those Indian cities' architecture is very developed and amazing. And academia has shut that down. They said this is just a natural formation, which is very laughable. But no, that's evidence of nuclear weaponry in the past. They said it had the power of 10,000 suns.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting because we find this everywhere. Sorry, were you still carrying on?
Found radioactive Geiger counter readings at Sodom and Gomorrah as well.
But I'll propose my hypothesis. I won't call it a theory. I'll call it a hypothesis. We can call it the Bush Whisperer hypothesis. So, like, in case like it's so far out that we got to like sink the ship. But I think the reason we have got hieroglyphic writing, and the reason we have Sumerian cuneiform, and the reason that the Sumerian cuneiform, the Sumerian language, is what the Phoenician language comes from, and why our historians, our archaeologists, and our anthropologists suggest that the Phoenician language evolved from hieroglyphs from pre-Egypt, or what they want to call ancient Egypt, I call pre-Egypt, just to make it simple, because I believe in different epochs. To me, this is an obvious thing, but now the question is why. And this was a conversation in a group the other day, And I was disagreeing with someone. And I was like, well, asking, well, what do you substantiate this on? And they had a few ideas, but I didn't see anything valid being said, Well, the stuff in Egypt isn't worn out enough. It isn't worn out enough. Okay. How do we know the whole thing wasn't under sand? I mean, we don't know. Mud flood. Maybe it was all excavated out some time ago. We just don't know. So anyway, this idea that back in the ancient times they arrived here, whoever arrived here, right? Like it doesn't matter whether you're Christian, Jewish, Greek, Sumerian, all these traditions, Quetzalcoatl, arrived here, right? Arrived here. This is what the story says. All these beings came here and taught us all this stuff. Okay? Tahuti, Thoth, whichever tradition you want to take. These guys came here and became great teachers. So, to me, when I look at this, it says to me, well, it stands to reason that wherever they came from, we don't know. But some people came here and they had great super technology. And whether we were engineered or whether we were here, let's not get sidetracked into nomenclature discussion. It doesn't really matter. We were then upgraded according to all the ancient stories. We were taught writing, we were taught agriculture, we were taught, and it doesn't matter where you go, the story is repetitive. It's part of our ancient mythos. It's part of the verbal stories told here in Southern Africa. It's part of the verbal stories told by tribes in Central Africa. The Aborigines tell the same story. Wherever you go, the story is universal. India, the Devis and the Divas arrived here in their Vimanas. Which story you want to take, it's the same story, essentially. So they came here and they upgraded us. But what did they upgrade us with? I think they had us communicating with hieroglyphic language. Maybe we didn't have the forebrain intellectual capacity to operate with their completely abstract Sumerian Phoenician language, or maybe they didn't want us to be able to read all of their texts. Whichever one, we don't know. I'm not one to make assumptions. But let's just look at the possibilities. So maybe humans were using these pictogram language pictures, and these the gods that we hear about in every tradition. It doesn't matter. You can speak about the Norse, whatever. They had their language. And at some point, we became highly evolved. Now we start talking about the abduction of princesses, of kings, royalty by Ravana in Sri Lanka and other of these evil beings that would abduct women. They wanted to have children. Okay, we hear the Sumerian story, interbreeding the 200 beings that came to Earth. They called the Igigi in the Sumerian story. Go to the Greek story, it was the Grigori, 200 of them that arrived on Earth. In the Sumerian story, they came from Mars. They took wives, women. They were creating offspring. The offspring mixed with humanity. We got a new breed. And time went through, the breeding mixed, and suddenly everybody had the potential to communicate on like a very high level. So now we developed our own written phonetic language. But we developed it from what? Well, the evidence says that it was developed from the pictorial language of pictures, which we call these hieroglyphics. So this is why both existed next to each other, in my opinion. It's because at some point we were ready to develop our own abstract language. And that's where the Phoenician came in. And then, of course, they've lied to us that the Phoenician is separate to the Paleo-Hebrew, is separate to... Maybe there's all just one language and they've got different dialects spoken in different areas and different times, different eras, right? But it's just the same language. So, but they were speaking Sumerian, which is interesting.